Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of Family and Children's Discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
Hey Ben, how you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Getting the new year off to a decent start. How about you?
I'm doing well. My Ravens made the playoffs in the tough AFC.
Hey, I have not really followed the NFL this year. The Falcons were abysmal, and so this is how'd Lamar Jackson do this year?
It's the first quarterback ever to have two consecutive 1,000-yard rushing seasons. So it wasn't as good as last year, but it's very good.
He's something. He's fun to watch.
He is fun to watch. Yeah, he's a beast. So, yeah, him. There's a lot of great quarterbacks right now in the NFL. It's been fascinating. Even my second team are the Packers, and seeing Aaron Rodgers have a bit of a renaissance this year. So.
See, I'm not a big Aaron Rodgers guy. Never really have. But
expected to win the MVP, I think. So, but we'll see.
Oh, he's had that good of a season. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's impressive.
Yeah. So he, look at one quarterback though, Patrick Mahomes. Every year he's always up and contentious, and he always reminds me of like a quarterback either on like a video game, a Madden game. I mean, the way he plays, it's like it's pretend, or even like in a movie, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, I don't know how he does it. He's just a freak of nature. Have you seen much of Pat Mahomes?
What's that about Pat Mahomes?
Have you seen him play much?
Just a little bit. Not enough to have. I mean, I saw some of the monster numbers he's put up. But when you were talking about the movie, I was thinking Lamar Jackson, and then he's sort of like a video game player.
Both of those guys at the same time. So, in different forms of media, realistically, I could very much imagine in a couple decades or so seeing a movie about some of these great quarterbacks that played in the early 2020s, right?
Very well, it could be. I mean, there's some studs out there.
They are. So, well, with the topic of movie awkwardly brought up by myself, I want to ask, Ben, have you seen many movies during COVID?
Not many. I think, a few. And one that was brand new. You would be really proud of me.
Okay. What movie that was brand new did you see?
Well, it was because you told me to. So,
okay.
But it was.
Yeah.
I just do what you say, man. The movie Soul.
Yes, absolutely. So we, to kind of break it, then we're kind of going back to our TFM at the Movies. One of our first episodes of the podcast was TFM at the Movies because I'm a big movie fan. You've not as much, but you have other things you enjoy doing more than I do. And I thought it would be a good time to kind of go back to analyzing films from a Christian perspective for a family because of a unique movie in Soul that I think brings a lot of discussion for family discipleship. But for me, I've actually watched a decent bit of movies, as always. I streamed a lot of Christmas movies. I always watch Die Hard every Christmas time, so as every good Christian should, right?
I can't concur on that one. I think I've seen part of it, but
okay. And actually, there's been a lot less movies that have come out this year. But one really good one that came out last year that I enjoyed, it was on Netflix, was The Trial of the Chicago 7, based upon the historical trial of the Chicago 7, some protesters of the Vietnam War. It was, regardless of your political positions on that, it was a great film, like really, really well done film. So I enjoyed that one a lot.
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we watched a Christmas movie or two, some old ones with the kids, and then watched a comedy, and but it was enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, new movies for you are movies that came out like after 1985, right?
Yeah, movies in my lifetime.
Yes, exactly. So now to turn to Soul, a very interesting film that both of us watched in preparation for this. Both of us got Disney Plus access for it. What is the basic premise of Soul, and how are people watching it, which I kind of spoiled?
Well, from what I understand, you would know better, it's only available on Disney Plus. It came out on Christmas Day, is that right?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Okay. Which, I don't know, that's a whole nother thing. I've heard that the most popular day, or had been in the past, to watch a movie was Christmas Day. And you can go to the theater, which is, I don't know, sort of a sad commentary on our culture to me. But again, I enjoy watching movies. I just don't do a whole lot of it. Anyway, the movie is about this fellow that he's really just captivated by music and doing a lot of musical gigs and things. And he's, I don't know, approaching middle age. It's not quite clear how old he is. And he gets the gig of a lifetime scheduled for later that day. He dies and then gets into all this, I don't know, interdimensional stuff with his soul, and he's interacting with the universe and, I don't know, the agents of the universe or something, with other souls, and it gets into big questions, which is interesting for a film that, it's Disney Pixar, an animated film, the kind of depth of content that's being covered there, but it's probably not the best description of it or the summary, but I think it kind of hits the high points.
Yeah, I think your description of it is interesting because it kind of goes to Disney's, like, their trailers. I saw a bunch of trailers of the movie before, and even what Disney kind of let out at synopsis, it was pretty vague, which makes a lot of sense because we're going to see this is a very odd movie, unlike any other children's movie I've ever seen, I would say. But I think getting much more into the plot than I think what you did really substantially spoils this film. I assume that you'd agree with that, correct?
I think that's a good, yeah. But it definitely is, like, you saw it before me and you said it's weird, and my wife and I watched it, and we watched it in segments just because of necessity. One of the reasons we don't watch a lot of movies is because they get started late. And,
yeah.
But I said, Tony told me this was kind of weird, and she's like, yeah, I agree. I'd say we kind of enjoyed it, but it was definitely out of the box.
Yeah. No, plenty of movies have been good that have been weird, but some of my favorite movies have been weird movies. But did you enjoy Soul, though, Ben?
I would say I sort of did. It was not like, I don't know that I would, want to go back and watch it all the time. There are some movies that I do, even though I've seen them multiple times, I'll go back and watch them periodically. Maybe I would watch it another time, but I would say I enjoyed it. But it wasn't like this thrilling experience for me.
Yeah. So I liked it for the most part. It's weird because, like, you're seeing some people are just like meh about it, and some reviews are like crazy about this. I thought it was funny at times, as almost all Pixar movies are, and it, as with other Pixar films, it gave me the kind of the Pixar feels at the end. It gets you emotional. If you're the type that might cry in a film, you might cry in this movie. I did not, for the record. But, it was not one of their best ones. It was still good. I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I will say that I thought it was really barely for kids. It is heavily marketed towards children. And obviously Pixar is a children's brand within Disney. But I don't see this movie as really that much being a kids movie, though I suspect most of our listeners will probably watch it with their children. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, it's my wife and I talked about that, how with our younger kids, she didn't think, especially at the beginning, that it would keep their attention because it's kind of moving along and it's abstract, and maybe our oldest child would be somewhat fascinated, but she often doesn't want to sit there and watch a movie. She just never really has been all that interested past about 30 minutes, unless it was something that
Good
really
for
gripped her. But I'm not complaining. The other two, they would sit there and watch videos all day if allowed. It didn't matter what it was. But yeah, it's definitely deep, and it's not your typical children's movie.
Yeah.
Again, just because of the metaphysical nature of it.
Yes. Now, you mentioned there's a metaphysical nature to this. And by the way, I will add one thing that is kiddish. Like, the animation is very, family focused. Like, and it is beautiful at times, but it is like fun looking animation. But now, is Soul a theological film? I'm assuming you would say yes, given all that you said about this so far.
Oh, certainly. It doesn't ever directly mention God, though I was surprised it did explicitly mention heaven, and then, this has really surprised me. Now it's spelled it out, HE double hockey sticks, but it mentions hell. Now, beyond that, there's no evidence of, hell or judgment or anything like that. But it's filled with the stuff of theology and kind of by extension philosophy. And so, we talk about this all the time. All of life is theological, but this touches on stuff that's, some of the biggest questions of life and things that Scripture addresses.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's one of the most theological films that I've ever seen. I've seen lately for sure, but maybe even ever seen at all. It really explores what defines the human experience and the purpose of human beings. In a lot of ways, like, the nature of this film reminded me of a very good film called The Tree of Life that is also weird, in kind of an indie film, which it's very, it's trying to ask big questions and explore the nature of humanity. It was a very unique experience. It's deeply, profoundly theological for a kid's film by every sense of the imagination. So, now, what does Soul teach about human nature?
So, in my opinion, this movie assumes sort of a basic goodness of human nature, or at best, just sort of blank slates. It's interesting at the beginning, as what's his name, Joe Gardner, the main character?
I think so, yeah.
It's amazing, and I read something about that, heard something about this on the radio, how we tend to forget things like names. We can remember the plot of a movie or of a story, but something as fundamental as the name of the protagonist, who we're like, what was that person's name in the story? But Joe Gardner, the main guy, he ends up there in the Great Before, and he sees all these little souls. They're going along, and there's these characters. There's 4 of them named Jerry, and they're one of them is ushering little souls off to different, I don't know, little buildings or something, and they're being assigned a personality or a temperament, and it's just sort of this random assignment. Here, you 3 go here, you 5 go there, and so even some of those temperaments that would incline us towards sin, it's just sort of natural. It's just there, and just sort of given to us by the universe or something. Yeah. I wasn't entirely clear that the Jerrys are they agents of the universe, or this, they're personal agents of an impersonal universe, or something like that. So I think that was what stood out to me about human nature. There's no shred of, because some of the temperaments and personality traits and things that are notable and noted about, they're going to be this way, this one's going to be a megalomaniac or something. Yeah. It wasn't portrayed necessarily as a bad thing, or there were any consequence, to that. It was almost just amoral. I don't know. What was your take on it?
Yeah, it was almost kind of funny even. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, and there's a lot to this movie. I think it's extremely vague, like you said, on how we started. So yeah, we see that like in the Great Before, that there are these kind of beings and like souls, and that they're being kind of shaped into who they were. But it never really gives you how they kind of came into existence before that point, or how they really started. Which, I think that was Disney not trying to offend anyone, although it kind of does offend people at times, which is interesting. I think it clearly teaches about human nature, is that all people become who they are in this kind of spirit realm. So you become who you are before life, which I think is something that kids will take in as a lesson from this story.
I was born this way, baby.
Oh, yeah. And so a person really is not the body they occupy in this film. Very clearly, a person is who they are before they get the body they occupy. So the body then just becomes kind of a house or a state of being for the person, rather than intricate to who the person is. Which I think it's interesting because this message really strongly would support the mentality behind, say, transgenderism logic, which separates, the person is the self inside the mind, even though you can't really find that exact thing, even though you can't separate firmly the mind from the physical body. And or even like it might support even you remember Rachel Dolezal? Do you remember that person?
I remember the name. Was it? Yeah. Remind me.
She was a white woman who pretended to be black and.
Yeah. And there was another one like that recently.
I'm sure there was, but yeah, in a lot of ways, actually, I think that people were outraged rightfully over that. I think the message of this film would very much have no problem with Rachel Dolezal because, she is this black person inside, regardless of what her body is. That, the body is just kind of a dwelling of that.
Well, that raises all kind of things, and it is interesting how the logic is consistent, but there are many who would say, "Oh, no, that is absolutely off limits. She can't just define that for herself." Though with something, more a bigger deal to me, gender. We're just free to sort of choose which end of the pole, or we can be ambiguous. And anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I think you make an excellent point about that.
Now, are we just souls with a shell, like this movie seems to teach?
No, I mean, we're embodied souls. One of our professors in seminary, I haven't listened to the talk or read it, but I've seen that he gave a faculty address, sort of like a culmination of his research about a theology of the body and how the proper mode of human existence is to be embodied. And so, and that's a big part of Jesus's resurrection and our resurrection, the final resurrection that we will share in his resurrection as believers. We're not just floating in eternity on the clouds playing harps with angel wings or something. We will have bodies because that is God's intention for those creatures made in his image. And so, the biblical teaching would definitely go against what was portrayed in Soul.
Yeah, I would agree with you that, and all that you say in that. Although I'll add that Christians sometimes act like we are just souls with a shell. Quite often, even in funerals, we might act like we're souls with a shell. But the self in the Bible is the body and soul. And we often can't really clearly divide between the two, although there is clearly a distinction, but it's sometimes hard to neatly separate the self and body and soul. We, as you mentioned, we're meant to be in our bodies forever, in fact. One example I think that's interesting of this, of how, the two really mingle together, might be there's a lot of evidence of people with ADHD, which I think is a medical condition of the physical body. It is not, the soul doesn't really have ADHD. People that have that and that grow up with that often become more creative. I mean, there's like empirical evidence that they're more involved in creative avenues of work. They're more likely to produce poetry and things like that, or other, creative avenues. And I think that, so there's a physical thing in their physical body that is impacting who they are at even a soul level, at a self level. And I think that just shows us, there is no us without our body fully. There is no fully us without a body, and there's no us fully without a soul, right?
Yeah, well said.
So now what does Soul teach about eternal life? Because there's a lot there, right?
It is just amazing. A movie that was intended for, or I assume it's being intended for children, how much is there. But, I mean, you mentioned this before about the soul just existing sort of yeah, I guess they didn't touch on whether the soul had been created or made or fabricated somehow. It just was existing before life, which, I mean, I've heard even people who are Christians suggest something like that, pointing to Jeremiah, that our soul's in heaven with God. I don't think that's what that's talking about. Just, I knew you in the womb. I mean, there's places where it talks about God knowing us. It seemed, I don't think that's what it's referring to, though. I mean, would you agree?
I would definitely agree, and I would even say to believe that is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into the Eastern, religions and things that are, pantheistic. And anyway, we were formed by God, and there's a moment when we begin. We are not eternally existing as God is, but our soul exists before life, and then it's not entirely clear what happens in the great beyond when you get on the conveyor belt into this big, I don't know, it sort of looks like the sun, but apparently it's not. I don't know what it is. They don't make it clear, but it doesn't seem bad, was my impression. So whether you're just absorbed into the universe or what, so there's that. There's also this teaching, or I say a teaching, part of the story. We may have there's a chance to shape another soul before they have a go at life, before we get to our final reward in the great beyond. There's, I don't know, purgatory or something. But so, yeah, I mean, it would depart from biblical teaching on those things, and I guess it would approach more like the guy, I forget his name, Moonwind or something, that had the crazy beard and hair, dancing around with the sign. Probably closer to stuff that folks like him would be persuaded by.
Yeah.
What else did you see?
Well, yeah, it is interesting because it is vague in a lot of ways. I mean, it's intentionally, like, this was one area where it's like Disney not wanting to offend anyone at all. But at the same time, I think there is a lot to it. And like he said, it's called the Great Beyond, in that kind of state of light. My assumption is that it's parallel to the Great Before. I thought originally on viewing it, like, I'm not even sure it's clear that it's not kind of ceasing to exist. I didn't think that probably was it, but I thought it might be so vague as it be. But my assumption is that it's something like the Great Before, or, the happiness and the just kind of spiritual state of being without a body. And definitely I think it's pretty clear that there's no body in the Great After, the Great Beyond. So. But anyway, one thing that I thought was fascinating was spiritual existence. We can assume in a lot of ways is better than physical existence at times. But actually, what's weird is there's a point at the end, and it's not given a spoiler to say this, where it's not very clear that this kind of heaven state of being is really better than living. And I'm actually thought of this, in the end of the movie, I thought of a time where John MacArthur talked about one time he was in a hospital bed and having, I think, heart surgery. And he was disappointed when he woke up because he kind of had some hopes that he would be in heaven, and I think a biblical way, but he wanted to serve the Lord, as Paul talks, that to live is Christ, to die is gain. I'm not sure that soul really teaches that die is gain. It teaches it as good, but even these, like, the mysterious, like, God-like creatures, the Jerrys, even seem to be supportive of that of a decision of someone to consider this physical world as better than eternity.
I didn't pick up on that, but I could see that. Maybe the Jerrys they're like the divine council or something.
Yeah, I don't know. My assumption is they're kind of like a hint. It felt very Hindu, is what it felt like to me.
Like a pantheon of.
Yeah, well, even because Hinduism actually, like, they're kind of monotheistic, and Hinduism is misrepresented sometimes. And it's a lot of ways it's more like the variety of deities are like a manifestation of the Brahma. And so I thought, like, the Jerrys are like a manifestation of the Jerry. Yeah.
I guess I have heard that.
But so in that light, I thought it felt very Hindu. But how does Soul contrast with the biblical worldview in general?
Well, I just thought about this, and maybe you were alluding to this earlier. This is not so much in line with the biblical worldview, but this could potentially offend atheists. We're very good at being offended these days, and but I mean, referring to life before, life after, and the great, as opposed to you just die and you go in the ground, and you're just sort of a combination of the chemical reactions happening in your body. But anyway, aside from that, there's no judgment in Soul. I guess maybe you'd face some consequences in life, but I mean, even there was, like you talked about, it was kind of funny. This one person that was, they were a megalomaniac and something else, something very antisocial, and they're like, well, this one's going to be a handful, and it's just sort of, ha ha ha. Whereas someone like that, I mean, that's troubling. Also, life isn't really vertical in the sense of a relationship to God, or even the universe. It's just sort of. I mean, now there is talk made about when Terry, he works with the Jerrys, and he sort of keeps count of who's dying and stuff, and he's very fastidious in keeping accurate records and this kind of stuff. He says you can't cheat the universe, when it's your time to go. So again, it's interesting that there are these personal qualities assigned to the universe, but it seems impersonal at the same time. But there's not this, beyond that, really an obligation to a deity or something, no bar of justice. It's much more focused on horizontal relationships with other people and with nature in a way. I mean, not like it was what's that movie that the one with Avatar, where people were, it was talking about taking care of the world and this kind of thing. It's not nearly to that extent, but appreciating nature was definitely emphasized. And anyway, so it's just much more of a horizontal thing, and not no obligation to anyone outside the world.
Yeah. So I'll add to that, the Jerrys, and my assumption is Terry is included in the coming together, because the Jerrys refer to themselves as the coming together at one point. And I think a lot of that, and it says it appears in different forms or whatever, and that seems like it very much seems heavily influenced by Hinduism in a lot of ways. My guess is that majority of this film is a majority of the worldview of those writers tended towards Hinduism more than anything else. Although what's interesting though is there's a point in the film where they're giving kind of these examples. These different people that were experts in their field are trying to act as mentors, basically, of souls. And they list, Albert Einstein for a scientist, and the person they pick for the religious figure was Mother Teresa, which I don't think says nothing. One, because Mother Teresa actually was substantially influenced, in fact, by Eastern religion, and she. It's kind of like a vague, everybody looks to Mother Teresa, so a kind of a vague Americana religion too. When actually, I will add very shortly, it's a small part of the film, but I think there's worthwhile consideration of whether we should look upon Mother Teresa as a great example of religion or morality at all. So, but
that is interesting. Yeah, I didn't really. I remember the scene, but it just didn't stand out to me. But and I don't know a whole lot about other. She fed the poor in Calcutta and that kind of thing. But as far as her thought and theology, I didn't know much about. But
I'll let the listeners. Look into that. I don't think it's as relevant, but I think there's also some Platonic ideas and some Buddhist ideas at this kind of at the same time, which is weird because the teachings of Plato and the teaching of the Buddhism are diametrically opposed, but they're brought together in a weird mush at times in this movie. There's a lot of Buddhism influence, especially in one character that's in this film that you've alluded to before. And even, actually, there's a point, the most overtly religious part of the film, I think, was there's a time where psychonautics is referred to. The practice of psychonautics, which is kind of like almost like getting in a trance to connect between the spiritual world and the physical world. And even the terminology they use is directly from Tibetan Buddhism. Like, I mean, that is the exact terminology that Tibetan Buddhists use, because there's like a heavy emphasis on meditation. And again, it's not seeing meditation merely as an emptying of self. It's the more Tibetan approach, where it's kind of a connecting between this world and a spiritual sense of the universe. So it's a syncretistic mess, is my conclusion of this.
Well, I mean, if you're free to just sort of take what you like from this one and that one, why not?
It's like a buffet of religions.
Yeah.
Put a little mashed potatoes here, put a little Hinduism here,
Right.
Now, what does soul suggest as the meaning of life? Because that is a heavy emphasis of the film.
Yeah, they spent a lot of time talking about that. My impression of it, at least, was sort of live in the moment and enjoy. I think the word or the term that Joe Gardner used was normal living. They're sitting there on the sidewalk or something, and 22 makes a comment about, she's trying to discover her purpose. So, your purpose is really not the thing you're here for, even though that's important. Because she said, well, maybe the thing that's going to give me spark, that's going to let me live, and then my purpose is to be a stargazer or walking. I'm really good at that. And Joe's, he's embodied in a cat. They had a little mix up there, and he said, oh, well, that's, those kind of things, that's just normal living. That's not really your purpose. And then he later rethinks that, and it's just sort of, it's almost like a carpe diem almost.
Yeah.
Just enjoy, you can see Robin Williams leading the charge. But that was what I understood them to be emphasizing. But I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I very much would. I don't think I have much to add to that. I mean, I think clearly living in the present is the meaning of life for the movie Soul. And I think that probably that is something that it is trying to catechize us, the viewers, in more than probably anything else. I think the writers intentionally want to teach children and adults that is what they should take away from this film. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. Yeah, it was not just some passing thing. You're like, well, it was kind of, I think catechized was a good word.
Yeah.
I mean, it was certainly emphasized in the film.
Yeah, I mean, people criticize Christian movies rightly sometimes for being preachy, and this was a very preachy film at times. But what is
you could say it was heavy-handed. In that regard.
It was heavy-handed, yeah. So what does the Bible present as the actual meaning of life?
To glorify God by loving Him and loving others. I mean, that's sort of bringing together Deuteronomy 6 and the great commandment and the second great commandment. And it is, He created us for His glory to display it. And so, maybe someone that we respect would say to glorify God by enjoying Him forever. I don't know, but
yeah, that's great. So. I'll just add a verse that kind of came to my mind as an actual response to this. Is in Ecclesiastes, it says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And I think we do that also by enjoying Him. John Piper's right on that. So I think that's pretty clear. I think a lot of ways this meant we are called, our real duty is to live our lives as an offering to God. Our lives are to be upward focused rather than just focused on our own enjoyment, our own sense of meaning even.
Yeah, definitely.
So is life about living in the present, Ben?
I'm not going to say that doesn't matter. I mean, it is important. It is where we live. God has appointed us to live at this time and not in the past. And I mean, probably we're going to live some into the future when it gets here. But we also are to have our eyes fixed clearly on the age to come. Now, that doesn't mean that we just hole up in the bunker and wait for Jesus to return. We have obligations and things in this life. We're to receive the things, the gifts he's given to us with thanksgiving. So we receive the gift and we thank him for it. We enjoy it. But and I'm just going to list off several places in Scripture. Colossians 3 tells us to set our minds on things above and to seek the things that are above. Jesus told us in the Sermon on the Mount to lay up treasures in heaven, not here on earth. We're to set our hope on the grace that will be revealed when Jesus returns. 1 Peter. Paul tells Timothy in the same place about the receiving the gifts with thanksgiving. He tells us to do good for those who are rich in this life with the world's goods. Like you wealthy, prosperous, #blessed pastor. We're supposed to do good and to share, to store up treasure for a good foundation for the future, so that we can take hold of what is truly life. So we do live here and now. We shouldn't just pretend that it doesn't matter. Sort of we're just a soul in a body, but it's all going to get burned up one day. Doesn't matter what we do to our body or in this world. That's taking it too far, but it's not the final thing. And so Scripture is very clear on that.
Yeah. I'll add to that some interesting points I think the New Testament often brings up is it kind of compares the Christian life to being an exile, being an alien, being a refugee. Mm-hmm. And, an exile doesn't live for where they're at. Doesn't live in the moment. It lives in the hopes of returning home. But a lot of people that are present minded in the way that this encourages them to be will end up going to hell, and in no small part because they're just focused on today rather than focusing on eternity. But it's interesting because the Bible at the same time does teach, especially in Ecclesiastes, which we referred to earlier, that we should delight in God, especially in the everyday, and that we should, in a sense, live in the moment, and that we don't live in worry. The Bible talks about when our worries, God's given us basically enough for today. Let each day worry about itself, essentially, rather than focusing on what's to come and trusting God in the moment. So I think there is some truth about living in the present, but I don't think that is the main thrust of the Bible.
Yeah, and you've mentioned Ecclesiastes a couple of times, and it is in some ways a very this-worldly book. We're told multiple times to enjoy your labor, enjoy your wife, just live in the life that God has given you. But that's not the only word Scripture has for us.
Yes. Now, what are some of the positive messages for families and soul? I assume it's not all terrible, Ben.
No, it's not all garbage or something. I think just the importance of embracing the life that we have, and I think it's very common, or I know it's very common, human nature to complain about our circumstances, to view the grass as being greener on the other side. If my circumstances were different, those kinds of things, or just be so looking forward to the next thing that we miss what's there now. And as a Christian parent, you could adjust this or infuse the Bible, but what we have now, that is a gift from God to enjoy the time that you have, and so use it, make the most of every opportunity, I think is Colossians, and so embracing the life that we have now, enjoy it, and seek to influence others. That's a big emphasis in the movie as well, trying to influence others in a way that benefits them. And as Christians, we'd say, yeah, we want to influence others for their good and God's glory, and for their joy. And so there are ways that we can take that message away, and that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
what did you see?
I think one emphasis that was there more at the end than any other time, especially the character 22, is I think it does teach us we should appreciate everyone, every person, even the person that doesn't have those great ambitions or find their purpose in, what we think is big things. And in that, realize that every single person that God has ever made has value and has a sense of purpose. And I think that is an important message that we can overlook. We can see some people as, to kind of allude to Animal Farm, some people are more equal than others, it says in the book. So, and lastly, I'll say, a great message in it is don't let ambition prevent you from seeing the good around you, which, in a lot of ways, it's so much of Disney stuff is like run hard after your dreams. And this is like even actually questions that in a I think, healthy way.
Yeah, I would agree. Because some of it's just nonsense. And we've talked about that on here before, some of that, follow your dreams, shoot for the moon kind of stuff, how, it's so unrealistic. I heard a comedian talking about that one time. He had taken his daughter to her freshman orientation in high school, and they were telling all these kids, you can be whatever you want to be. And he said, they're lying to those kids. He said, yeah, maybe 4 of them can, and the rest of them better learn how to weld. Yeah. He said, even then, it helps if you know somebody, and it's so I agree with you that it did push against some of that popular self-esteem. I don't know. I kind of just lump it all together with, popular psycho stuff. Yeah. Self-help.
So with all this said, do you recommend Christian families actually watch Sold then, or no?
I would say probably not with younger kids. They may not be interested. Possibly with older kids, but not without discussion. It wouldn't be my first pick, but I'm also not quick to recommend movies, kids movies, and recommend movies to families in general. Not because I, am super against that. I just don't do it that often, and I don't talk a lot about my own personal media consumption with people that I pastor, just because of issues of conscience. I don't want to burden somebody's conscience or free their conscience when it shouldn't be, and so I just don't talk a whole lot about that. But yeah, I don't think it's there's worse things that you could watch, and I think it can. This leads into what when we talk about in a minute, but it could be an opportunity with a little bit older child or a teenager or something to have some fruitful discussion.
Yeah. I appreciate your comment about, as pastors, we need to be really careful about not binding conscience. And I think that's true. But as an individual, I would probably privately recommend, probably only a good one if you're really serious about discipleship, discipling your kids and willing to talk about it. If your main way that you use movies, if you do very little family worship and the main way you do movies is to put something on while you do the dishes, this isn't a good choice for that. There are good children's movie choices for that. I can think of The Iron Giant might be a great one to just put on for the kids. Tangled. There are many, many good, decent children's movies that don't necessarily believe the Bible. That are fine to just put on when you have to get chores done. But I wouldn't put this among them, personally. I think it could be a great opportunity to watch this if you want to talk about the nature of life, which is an important thing to talk about. Again, I don't see a 3-year-old being one that would be involved in that discussion, though. So.
Yeah.
So with all that said, to kind of wrap this all up, how could parents make Soul a discipleship opportunity with their kids?
Well, like I alluded to a minute ago, to sit down and watch it and to help foster critical thinking. Because really anything we watch or listen to, we take in, even an article you read, just thinking about it critically and not just passively going, okay. But it's helping your children learn how to watch and with a discerning eye, with a critical eye, and not just be a consumer. Or word we've heard a lot this year is sheeple. But there is some truth to that applied in a different context, and because, like you said, there is clearly a message being pushed forward, and so and that's any film or song where the person has certain commitments and they have a view of the world and they're putting that forward. And art is you're trying to tell the truth about something, or at least the truth as you see it or your impression of it. And so being able to engage with that, and then, well, what does the Bible say this? How does this compare? And but I think it would take a child that's a little bit more mature and got some grounding in God's word and that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I would say that one, actually, an interesting idea. I thought so much of Ecclesiastes as I watched this movie. And maybe it'd be a cool idea, for a family. I mean, you don't have to rush to the theater or anything to see this movie. So maybe in family worship, read through Ecclesiastes, especially with some older kids, and then watch it and to kind of discuss it and contrast it with Ecclesiastes. That really, I think, could provoke some awesome discussion with our kids. I think regardless, a good thing to do is start and end the movie by kind of asking our kids what the purpose of life is. Have a good discussion then from there, because it could really lead to some great points and some great discipleship opportunities through that. Or it could even make a really safe intro to world religions. I think parents are responsible to teach their kids things even like what their neighbors believe. And probably a great way to start is a movie that has a whole lot of what their neighbors believe in it. Way more than any other kids' movies that I know of. So.
I can't think of it. I mean, and you would be more familiar, but I have not seen anything that covered that kind of ground.
All right. So, well, I'm glad we were able to have this discussion, and I hope that listeners are blessed by this as they watch this movie, or maybe choose not to watch this movie, whatever their conscience leads them to.
Yeah. Hopefully, I would say watch it first yourself, and that can be the case often. But just to be prepared, or hopefully we covered the terrain well enough. But I'm glad you suggested that we do this, because I think it's Disney, so it's going to get watched.
Yeah.
And hopefully this will be a benefit to those who listen, and as they disciple their children and influence others who do.
Well, it's always good talking to you, brother.
Yes, amen.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Theological Family Ministry Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your friends on social media. All new episodes are available to listen to on Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spreaker, and iTunes. We hope you have a great week, and join us again every first and third Thursday.